The company's HR policies looked good on paper, but they weren't being properly implemented or enforced at the ground level. Supervisors like Janet were too overwhelmed to address workplace bullying, and employees were afraid to report problems for fear of retaliation or being labeled as troublemakers. As Sarah continued her undercover work, she began documenting everything she witnessed. She took careful notes about management failures, inadequate resources, and the toxic behaviors that were poisoning her company's culture. She saw how employees were forced to choose between following company policies and meeting unrealistic performance metrics. She witnessed the favoritism that allowed certain employees to avoid difficult tasks while others were overloaded. But perhaps most importantly, she began to understand the profound impact that workplace culture had on people's lives. Maria often worked through lunch because she was afraid of falling behind on her call quotas. Kevin studied for his college exams during his brief breaks, trying to balance education with the need to earn money. Other employees dealt with personal struggles, health problems, family crises, financial stress that were made worse by the hostile work environment. Sarah found herself developing genuine relationships with her coworkers, people she had never really known despite being their ultimate boss. She learned about their dreams, their challenges, and their perspectives on the company. Many of them had valuable insights about how to improve processes and better serve customers, but their ideas were never sought or heard by management. The experience was transforming Sarah's understanding of leadership and corporate responsibility. She had always thought of herself as a good boss, someone who cared about her employees' well-being. But she was beginning to realize that good intentions at the top meant nothing if they didn't translate into positive experiences for workers at every level of the organization. Meanwhile, Lisa's behavior was escalating. She seemed to sense that Sarah was different somehow, perhaps more educated or confident than the typical new hire, and this made her more determined to assert her dominance. She began excluding Sarah from informal lunch groups, making jokes at her expense, and finding fault with her work even when it was performed correctly. The other employees began to notice the pattern of harassment, but most were too afraid or too beaten down by the system to intervene. They had seen what happened to people who crossed Lisa or made waves in the department. The few who tried to support Sarah did so quietly, offering sympathetic looks or small gestures of kindness when Lisa wasn't watching. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something that probably happened to new employees regularly. The hazing, the exclusion, the deliberate attempts to make someone fail it was a pattern of behavior that the company's leadership had failed to recognize or address. She wondered how many good employees had quit in their first few weeks because of treatment like this, and how much talent the company had lost due to toxic individuals who were allowed to operate without consequences. As her third week in the position began, Sarah could feel her patience wearing thin. Every day brought new examples of Lisa's cruelty and the management's failure to address obvious problems in the department. She was gaining invaluable insights that would help her improve the company, but the personal cost was higher than she had expected. Being treated as disposable and worthless was taking an emotional toll, even though she knew it was temporary. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would expose everything Sarah had learned about her company's hidden culture. Lisa's behavior was becoming more bold and more cruel, while Sarah's understanding of the systemic problems was becoming clearer each day. Neither woman knew that they were heading toward a moment that would change everything not just for them, but for the entire organization. The incident that would expose everything began on a particularly stressful Tuesday morning in Sarah's fourth week undercover. The customer service department was already buzzing with tension before the workday officially started. The computer system had crashed the night before, leaving hundreds of unresolved customer tickets in the queue. Janet Williams looked more frazzled than usual as she hurried between cubicles, trying to manage the crisis with insufficient resources and no support from upper management. Lisa Hampton arrived that morning in an especially foul mood. She had been out late the night before and was nursing a hangover, which made her even more irritable than usual. When she saw the long list of overdue customer complaints waiting to be addressed, she immediately began looking for someone to blame and someone to take out her frustrations on. Sarah was quietly working at her desk, methodically going through her assigned tickets and trying to help frustrated customers who had been waiting for responses. She had become quite good at the job over the past few weeks, developing a genuine empathy for the people who called in with problems. Unlike her coworkers, who had become jaded and defensive after years of dealing with angry customers and unrealistic expectations, Sarah approached each call with fresh energy and a sincere desire to help. This morning, however, Sarah was assigned to work on a particularly complex case involving a major corporate client who had experienced significant problems with TechFlow's software. The client was threatening to cancel their contract, which would result in a substantial loss of revenue for the company. Sarah knew, from her position as founder, that this particular client was crucial to the company's growth strategy. But as Sarah Johnson, administrative assistant, she was only seeing the immediate customer service aspect of the problem. The case required coordination with multiple departments, technical support, billing, and account management, but the company's internal communication systems made this nearly impossible for a junior employee to accomplish. Sarah spent most of her morning being transferred between departments, put on hold, and given conflicting information by different supervisors who were too busy to properly address the situation. Lisa had been watching Sarah's struggles with growing irritation. In Lisa's mind, Sarah was getting attention and working on important cases that should have been assigned to more senior staff members like herself. The fact that Sarah seemed to be handling the complexity better than Lisa expected made her even more resentful. Lisa had always prided herself on being one of the more competent employees in the department, and Sarah's quick learning curve was threatening her sense of superiority. Around 11 o'clock, Sarah finally managed to reach the technical support manager who could actually help resolve the client's software issues. She was making real progress on the case, coordinating between departments in a way that was finally getting results. But her success was noticed by Lisa, who saw it as an opportunity to assert her authority and put Sarah back in what Lisa considered her proper place. Lisa marched over to Sarah's cubicle with a stack of basic data entry tasks that typically would be distributed among all the junior staff. She dropped the papers on Sarah's desk with a loud thud, interrupting Sarah's important phone call with the technical support manager. "These need to be done immediately," Lisa announced loudly enough for surrounding coworkers to hear. "I don't know why you're wasting time on complicated cases when you can barely handle simple tasks. Focus on work that's actually appropriate for your skill level." Sarah politely asked Lisa to wait a moment while she finished coordinating the technical solution for the major client. She explained that she was close to resolving a critical issue that could save the company a significant contract, but Lisa wasn't interested in hearing about Sarah's progress or the importance of the case she was working on. "I don't care what you think you're working on," Lisa snapped. "You're an administrative assistant, not an account manager. Do the work you're actually qualified to do, and stop trying to be something you're not." The exchange was drawing attention from other employees in the department. Some looked uncomfortable witnessing the public humiliation, while others seemed relieved that they weren't the target of Lisa's wrath. Janet Williams was nowhere to be seen, probably dealing with another crisis in a different part of the office. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that she had been controlling for weeks. In her real position as company founder, she would never tolerate an employee speaking to anyone this way. But as Sarah Johnson, she had to swallow her pride and accept the treatment. She politely told the technical support manager that she would call back, ended the call, and began looking through the data entry tasks that Lisa had dumped on her desk. But Lisa wasn't finished. She seemed energized by Sarah's compliance and decided to push further, perhaps sensing that she could get away with even more aggressive behavior. She leaned over Sarah's cubicle wall and began critiquing Sarah's work methods, her appearance, and her general competence in a voice loud enough for the entire section to hear. "Maybe if you spent less time trying to impress people with cases you can't handle, and more time learning how things actually work around here, you might become a decent employee," Lisa said with a smirk. "But honestly, I'm not sure you have what it takes to succeed in a professional environment." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued working on the data entry tasks without responding. She had learned that engaging with Lisa's provocations only made things worse. The other employees were pretending to focus on their own work, but Sarah could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see how she would react to this latest humiliation. The morning continued with Lisa finding new ways to undermine and embarrass Sarah. She questioned Sarah's decisions on simple tasks, redirected her work assignments without explanation, and made disparaging comments about her performance to other employees. By lunchtime, Sarah was struggling to maintain her composure. The experience was teaching her valuable lessons about workplace harassment and toxic management, but the personal cost was becoming almost unbearable. During lunch break, Sarah stepped outside to call David Rodriguez and update him on the situation. She described Lisa's escalating behavior and the complete lack of management oversight that allowed such treatment to continue. David was appalled and wanted to immediately intervene, but Sarah convinced him to let the experiment continue a little longer. She felt that she was on the verge of witnessing something that would provide crucial insights into the company's culture problems. When Sarah returned from lunch, she discovered that Lisa had reassigned the important corporate client case to herself, claiming that it was too complex for a junior employee to handle. This was particularly frustrating because Sarah had been close to resolving the issue before Lisa's interruptions. Now Lisa would likely get credit for the successful resolution, while Sarah was relegated to mundane paperwork. The afternoon brought a steady stream of difficult customers who were frustrated by long wait times and previous bad experiences with the company's customer service. Sarah handled each call professionally, but she could see how the constant negativity and pressure was wearing down her colleagues. Kevin looked exhausted from trying to balance work with his college studies. Maria was visibly stressed about meeting her call quotas while dealing with particularly challenging customers. Meanwhile, Lisa was struggling with the complex client case that she had taken from Sarah. Without understanding the background work that Sarah had already done, Lisa was making little progress and becoming increasingly frustrated. She made several calls to different departments, but she lacked Sarah's diplomatic approach and problem-solving skills. The client was growing more impatient, and Lisa was beginning to realize that she had overestimated her ability to handle the situation. Rather than admit her mistake or ask for help, Lisa decided to blame Sarah for supposedly leaving the case in a more complicated state than necessary. She began telling other employees that Sarah had messed up the initial work on the case, making it harder for Lisa to resolve. This was completely untrue, but Lisa needed someone to blame for her own struggles with the assignment. The tension in the office continued building throughout the afternoon. Lisa's frustration with the difficult case was making her even more volatile, and she was taking out her anger on anyone within reach. She snapped at Kevin for asking a question about procedure, criticized Maria's phone manner, and found fault with work that other employees had completed satisfactorily. As the workday neared its end, Sarah was finishing up her assigned data entry tasks and preparing to leave. She had managed to complete everything Lisa had given her, despite the interruptions and harassment throughout the day. She was looking forward to going home and processing everything she had experienced and witnessed. But Lisa had other plans. She approached Sarah's cubicle one final time, ostensibly to check on the completed data entry work. However, it quickly became apparent that Lisa was looking for reasons to criticize and extend the day's harassment. "This work is sloppy," Lisa announced, pointing to perfectly acceptable data entry that met all the company's standards. "You're going to need to stay late and redo all of this. Maybe if you had focused on doing it right the first time instead of wasting time on cases you couldn't handle, you wouldn't be in this situation." Sarah looked at the work Lisa was criticizing. It was accurate, complete, and formatted correctly according to the guidelines she had been given. Lisa was clearly making up problems in order to force Sarah to work late, probably as punishment for earlier perceived slights. "I believe the work meets all the specified requirements," Sarah said calmly, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her growing anger. "If you could point out specific errors, I'd be happy to correct them." Lisa's face flushed with anger at what she perceived as defiance. In her mind, junior employees were supposed to accept criticism without question, regardless of whether it was justified. Sarah's reasonable response was seen as insubordination that needed to be dealt with more forcefully. "Don't argue with me," Lisa snapped. I'm telling you the work is unacceptable and you need to fix it. That's not a discussion, it's an order. The confrontation was attracting attention from the remaining employees who were still in the office. Some were packing up to leave, but they slowed their activities to watch what was happening. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone could sense that something significant was about to occur. Sarah realized that this was a crucial moment in her undercover investigation. How she handled Lisa's unreasonable demands would determine not only her own experience, but also what the other employees learned about standing up to workplace bullies. She had spent weeks documenting the toxic culture and management failures, but now she was facing the choice between protecting herself and protecting the cover story that was allowing her to gather vital information about her company. The stage was set for the explosive confrontation that would expose everything, both women's true natures and the fundamental problems that had been hiding in plain sight within TechFlow Solutions. The confrontation reached its boiling point when Lisa, frustrated by Sarah's calm refusal to accept unjustified criticism, decided to escalate the situation in a way that would forever change both their lives. The office had grown quieter as most employees prepared to leave for the day, but those who remained were watching the tense exchange with growing concern. Sarah maintained her professional composure despite Lisa's increasingly aggressive behavior. She had spent 4 weeks documenting the toxic culture in this department, and this moment was crystallizing everything she had observed about bullying, poor management oversight, and the abuse of power. But she was also reaching the limit of her ability to remain silent in the face of such treatment. "I've reviewed the work multiple times," Sarah said firmly but politely. "It meets all the stated requirements. If there are specific changes you need, please document them in writing so I can address them appropriately." This reasonable request sent Lisa over the edge. In her mind, Sarah was challenging her authority in front of other employees, and she couldn't allow that to happen. Lisa had built her reputation in the department on her ability to intimidate and control those she considered beneath her, and Sarah's refusal to be cowed was threatening that carefully constructed image. "You know what your problem is?" Lisa shouted, her voice carrying across the entire customer service area. "You think you're better than everyone else here. You walk around with this attitude like you're too good for this job, like you deserve better treatment than the rest of us." The accusation was particularly ironic, given Sarah's true identity. But she remained silent, letting Lisa continue her tirade. Other employees had stopped pretending to work, and were openly watching the confrontation unfold. "Well, let me tell you something," Lisa continued, stepping closer to Sarah's cubicle. "You're nothing special. You're just another entry-level employee who can't even handle basic tasks without screwing them up. And if you don't like the way things work around here, maybe you should find somewhere else to work." Sarah felt her professional mask slipping as Lisa's verbal assault continued. She had endured weeks of harassment, watched other employees suffer under the toxic culture, and witnessed the complete failure of management to address obvious problems. But she knew that maintaining her cover for just a little longer would give her the comprehensive understanding she needed to fix these systemic issues. Lisa, however, wasn't finished. She seemed to be feeding off the attention from her audience and the sense of power she felt in publicly humiliating someone. She grabbed a can of Coca-Cola from her desk, which had been sitting there since lunch, and held it while continuing her verbal attack. "Maybe this will help you understand your place around here," Lisa said with a cruel smile. Without warning, she pulled back her arm and threw the can of Coke directly at Sarah, dousing her with the sticky liquid. The cold soda splashed across Sarah's face, hair, and clothes, dripping onto her desk and keyboard. The entire office fell silent, shocked by the physical assault they had just witnessed. Even in a department known for toxic behavior, no one had ever seen anything this extreme. Lisa stood there with a satisfied smirk, apparently pleased with her dramatic gesture of dominance. Sarah slowly wiped the Coke from her face, her hands shaking with rage. In that moment, 4 weeks of accumulated humiliation, documentation, and self-control finally reached its limit. The experiment had served its purpose, She had gathered enough evidence of the cultural problems to completely restructure the department, and she no longer had any reason to tolerate this abuse. "That was a mistake," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a new authority that hadn't been there moments before. Lisa laughed, misinterpreting Sarah's calm response as defeat. "What are you going to do about it? Run to HR? File a complaint? Good luck with that. I've been here 3 years, and you've been here 3 weeks. Guess who they're going to believe?" Sarah stood up slowly, soda still dripping from her hair onto the floor. The other employees watched in fascination as something fundamental seemed to shift in her demeanor. The submissive, quiet administrative assistant was disappearing, replaced by someone who radiated confidence and authority. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. 3 years is a long time. Long enough to establish a pattern of harassment, bullying, and creating a hostile work environment. Long enough to cost this company valuable employees and damage its reputation. And definitely long enough to document grounds for immediate termination. Lisa's smirk faltered slightly, but she wasn't ready to back down. "Who do you think you are, threatening me? You're nobody here. You don't have any power or influence. You're just another disposable employee who can be replaced tomorrow." Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out her cell phone, which had been recording audio throughout the confrontation. She also retrieved her real company ID badge, which identified her as Sarah Mitchell, founder and chairman of the board of TechFlow Solutions. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Employees who had been watching from a distance suddenly stepped closer, trying to see if they were reading the ID badge correctly. Lisa's face went from triumphant to confused to terrified in a matter of seconds. "My name isn't Sarah Johnson," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent office. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I founded this company 8 years ago. For the past month, I've been working undercover in this department to understand the real culture and working conditions that exist here." Lisa's can of Coke slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. Her face had gone completely white, and she seemed unable to speak or move. The other employees were equally stunned, trying to process the revelation that their quiet coworker was actually the ultimate boss of the entire company. "During my time here," Sarah continued, "I've documented systematic harassment, inadequate management oversight, and a toxic culture that has been allowed to flourish unchecked. I've witnessed bullying, discrimination, and the abuse of power that has undoubtedly driven away talented employees and created a hostile work environment." She turned to address the other employees who were still present. "Kevin, Maria, and everyone else who has been professional, hardworking, and kind during my time here, you have nothing to worry about. Your jobs are secure, and significant changes are coming to improve your working conditions." Then she turned back to Lisa, who was now visibly trembling. "But you, Lisa, have just provided the final piece of evidence I needed. Physical assault against a coworker crosses every line we have. Your employment with TechFlow Solutions is terminated immediately, effective right now." Lisa finally found her voice, but it came out as a desperate whisper. "You can't. I mean, I didn't know. You thought I was someone you could abuse without consequences," Sarah interrupted. "You thought that your position gave you the right to humiliate and mistreat people you considered beneath you. You thought wrong on both counts." Sarah pulled out her phone and called security, instructing them to come to the customer service department immediately to escort a terminated employee from the building. Then she called David Rodriguez and asked him to come down to the office right away. As they waited for security to arrive, Sarah addressed the remaining employees more fully. "I want all of you to know that what you've witnessed today represents everything this company stands against. No employee should ever have to endure harassment, bullying, or physical assault in the workplace. The fact that this behavior was allowed to continue is a failure of leadership that I take full responsibility for." Kevin raised his hand tentatively. "Miss Mitchell, are we in trouble for not reporting what was happening?" "Absolutely not. I understand how difficult it is to report harassment when you're afraid of retaliation or when management seems unresponsive. That's exactly why I needed to see this firsthand. We're going to completely restructure how this department operates, starting with proper management training and clear consequences for toxic behavior. David Rodriguez arrived just as security was escorting Lisa from the building. She kept looking back over her shoulder, as if hoping this was all some kind of elaborate prank or misunderstanding. But the reality was sinking in. She had thrown a drink at the founder of the company, and her career at TechFlow was over. Over the following days, Sarah worked with David and the HR department to implement sweeping changes based on her undercover experience. Janet Williams was given additional management training and support staff to help her properly oversee the department. New policies were established for reporting harassment, with multiple channels and protections against retaliation. The computer system that crashed regularly was finally updated and replaced. Most importantly, Sarah instituted regular leadership rounds, where executives would spend time working alongside employees in different departments, not undercover, but as a way of staying connected to the real challenges their workers faced. She never wanted to be so disconnected from her company's culture again. The story of Lisa throwing Coke at the company founder spread quickly through the office, becoming legendary within TechFlow and eventually reaching other companies in their industry. It served as a powerful reminder that you never know who you're really dealing with, and that treating people with basic respect and dignity isn't just morally right, it's also professionally smart. Kevin got promoted to a team leader position and was able to reduce his work hours to focus more on his studies. Maria received recognition for her dedication and was given more flexible scheduling to help with her family responsibilities. The other employees who had shown professionalism and kindness during Sarah's undercover period all received commendations and career development opportunities. As for Sarah, the experience fundamentally changed how she approached leadership. She had always considered herself a caring boss, but experiencing workplace harassment firsthand gave her a deeper understanding of how company culture affected every aspect of employees' lives. She implemented regular anonymous surveys, created multiple channels for reporting problems, and established clear consequences for toxic behavior at every level of the organization. The undercover experiment had been more challenging and eye-opening than Sarah had ever expected, but it had also made her a better leader and created a stronger, more positive company culture. And while she never planned to throw Coke at anyone herself, she had no regrets about the dramatic way her true identity had been revealed. Sometimes it takes a shocking moment to create the change that should have happened long ago. Years later, when TechFlow Solutions was recognized as one of the best places to work in their industry, Sarah would often think back to that moment when Lisa threw the Coke and unknowingly changed everything. It had been the catalyst for transformation that benefited every employee in the company, proving that sometimes the most unpleasant experiences can lead to the most positive outcomes.